Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. I'm Paul Healy and I'm joined by Michael O'Toole. It's been some time since we've done a podcast. We do apologise, but that's the nature of the beast sometimes. How's it going, Mick?
Yeah, God, it's very warm, isn't it? Jesus, not a day for doing a pod like this. Hope anybody who listens to this is out walking or something.
Yes, I'm getting cooked alive here as we record this, but we're very conscious of the fact that we haven't done one.
I'll be talking about, as part of this, about a stakeout. You and I both stayed in separate days, and fuck me, was it hot.
Well, I actually think this was the best stakeout ever today because we decided unusually to get out of the car because we were in a position where we could actually sit on a park bench, and that was unreal. It was very nice, a nice change for once, not sitting in a baking hot car.
Well, we'll get into it later, but I wasn't that smart. I'll put it that way. So it didn't end particularly well. And we can talk about how hard it is to do a stakeout on a day like that. Anyway.
Oh, are you saying things got a bit nasty in the car?
Oh, no, because we each had two cars. It was a 2-car job, but it was really hot. And look, I was going to say, on stakeouts, you can't keep the engine running. So if you can't keep the engine running, you can't really keep the aircon going. So it was like, it was Monday. Think back to how warm Monday was. It was boiling. It reminded me of the time me, you and Mick and Neil went over to Spain. Remember for the whole Kenan thing where we're sitting in the car, don't mention McDonald's. But Jesus, that was murder. And that Monday was just as bad because you were in a car with no aircon, and I was well over 20 degrees. And it's hotter when you're in the car and it's more concentrated. So it wasn't good.
No, God.
Anyway.
Geez, our bosses I don't think they'll ever fully understand the lengths that we have to go to. But unless they've been a journalist themselves, and some of them have, to be fair. But that's part and parcel of the job. Sometimes you have to sit in a hot car for a very long time before you get what you want.
And we didn't get what we wanted, which made it even worse. But anyway.
No. Well, come here. We're here to talk about the Annie McCarrick case. And obviously, while I was away last week and well into this week as well, it is still the most significant crime story going on at the moment. And that is because Gardai have been searching at an address in Clondalkin in West Dublin for the past week and a half now at this stage. Just over a week anyway. Well,
no, it was this time. It was last Thursday morning that the press release came out. So
it's a week.
It's a week. And, I was just thinking about this, Paul, did anybody have an inkling about this at all? Like, nobody got a sniff of it. And isn't that an indicator that everybody thinks we're fed stuff and, that we go up to the depot, Gardai headquarters every day, we get our stories and they give us a wee smack in the arse or a pat in the head and go out, good girl and good boy. Nobody knew a thing about this.
No, I had a text from somebody who said, no, there you go. We keep you on your toes.
They certainly do. Because you know what? Was I driving somewhere or something and I had a whole rick of messages from the news desk. I was going, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen the press release. Well, come on, I was doing something. And anyway,
it's an incredible development. Obviously, this is probably one of the most well-known missing persons cases. It's been going on for over 32 years. Annie McCarrick from Long Island in New York. She went missing on the 26th of March, 1993. We've done podcasts about this. We've done plenty of stories about this. You've been doing stories probably since the start of your career on this. And there have been so many theories under the sun about what happened to Annie McCarrick. She was part of that so-called vanishing triangle of young women who went missing in and around the same time and around roughly similar in that triangle area. But it seems to be the case that Gardai, over the past certainly 5 years anyway, have re-examined this to the point where they're looking at maybe people a bit closer to Annie's circle. And they have zeroed in on this particular suspect who they arrested on suspicion of murder. Obviously, the first arrest in the case. Now, he was spoken to by Gardai over 30 years ago, but this is the first time he's been arrested on suspicion of murder. He's in his 60s now. And he was released without charge, and the investigation continues, and the search of this property continues. And the property is connected to him, but back 30 years ago. Isn't that right? Like, so it's not... The current occupants of that home have absolutely nothing to do with this case.
And yes, and Gardai were very keen to stress that this is is about 32 years ago. It's not about the here and now. So they have stressed that the residents of that house in Clondalkin are not connected in any way to Annie, nor are they connected in any way to the investigation. So I think simultaneous to the arrest of this man, who was arrested at his home outside Dublin on Thursday morning, simultaneous to that, the guards went to this house in Clondalkin, told the owners, the residents, what was happening, asked them to leave. The guards, can take over a house, and because it's connected to an investigation, and that's what they did. And they brought in. We can talk about this. They sealed it off. By the time we got there, by the time we found out where it was, they had steel hoardings up around it. They got it up quite quickly because I think we were there probably about 10:30. So they had that up the whole time, and they have been there ever since. So we sort of got guidance that it was going to take more than a few days, but this is a week now. I think our understanding is they're still there today.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've got guidance since that, this is a complex search and a very thorough search. If people may remember the Tina Satchwell case where Gardai had a warrant for what was called an invasive search, where they were going to dig up, knock down and demolish things left, right and centre. And that's what they're doing here. So there is an extension on this property. For example, there are outhouse buildings in the back garden of the property. So they need to knock things down, don't they, in order to get access to where they want to look.
Yes, I think it's important to stress that, let's call it the original house, to the original footprint of the house. I don't think they're overly interested in that. They're not going to be digging up floorboards. I don't think there's anything, don't think the Gardai believe there's anything there of interest to them. But you're right, there is an extension. We're not saying where it is, but it is quite a long garden.
Yeah,
it's very substantial garden, and we do know there's an extension. So that effectively, they're going to knock that down, or they have knocked it down, and they have to start on that, and that's a big job. Yeah,
and you can even see, I mean, if you go back and look at, there are photographs out there from the various sales of the house over the years, and you can see lots of different changes over the years, as there would be, to properties and to the back garden in particular. So they have a lot of work there to kind of scale it back, I suppose, to the time when it was in the state that it was 32 years ago, when they think, they obviously don't know for sure, but they obviously strongly suspect that Annie McCarrick may have been buried there.
I don't think they do. I'll be totally honest. Somebody told me that they would have to be very, very lucky for that to happen. So I think they're covering that eventuality.
Yeah, it's part of the. I mean, yes. I'm not saying that they absolutely think that, but it's part of the. They're certainly looking to see that possibility.
Yes, but if there's no body there, which I suspect, and I think Gardai would suspect, there might be other evidence. There might be other necklaces. Who knows what may have been buried there? So, because when you think about it, Sandymount, Annie McCarrick, as you say, she was from Long Island in New York. She was living and working in Sandymount in south central Dublin. So Sandymount to Clondalkin, it's a good while. Well, it's half an hour by car, wouldn't it be? Really?
Yeah.
Is it feasible? Say, if Miss McCarrick was murdered in Sandymount, would you necessarily take a body from Sandymount to a built-up area like Clondalkin? I personally, I think that's unlikely. But look, I think they have to cross the T's and dot the I's. But they're looking for all sorts of evidence, so you don't know what may be there. But I was told they would have to be really, really lucky. In other words, it's a long shot that the body will be there.
And they have brought the Cadaver Dog in from the north, PSNI Cadaver Dog Fern, the exact same dog that was used to detect and find the remains of Tina Satchwell. So, yeah, they're obviously making sure that they, bring in that possibility that the remains are there.
Let me ask you this, Paul. I know that Fern was also used in the initial Michael Gein search, but he wasn't tasked with searching the slurry pit where his remains were found, because we know that had been searched already. This was, the sort of wider search of the land and everything. So he wasn't tasked with that. But I just wanted to ask you, from you covering the case, Fern indicated a spot where Mrs. Satchwell, Miss Dingvan, was buried quite quickly, didn't she?
Oh yeah, from the evidence we heard in that case, while the dog might have been getting excited, it has a totally different reaction of which it is trained to when it confirms that it is smelling, that it has detected human remains. But before they'd even moved the couch, there was a big, large couch and a whole bunch of rubbish in front of the stairs where Tina Satchwell was found. The dog got excited under the stairs, and so that made them think, right, well, the dog is interested in that area. But it was only when they moved all the clutter that the dog, and when they had basically effectively already dug and found what they suspected were the remains, the dog indicated, yeah, the remains were there. So it's probably the same in this search. Like, they'll probably bring that dog back in, I'd say, when they have excavated the area that they are particularly interested in here. So yeah, even though the dog has already been brought in, I'd say she's going to come back.
Yes, and also, they're called cadaver dogs, but I think they're officially called body recovery dogs. But yes, if memory serves me correct, because I think in other high profile cases, it doesn't need a cadaver to be there. So in other words, in a certain time there can be a scent of death. If there was somebody killed and the body was there for a while and then moved, that scent. Well, I'm not talking historic ones, so not in this case, but more recent, if that had been a couple of days or whatever, there is a scent of death that the dogs can pick up as well. So you don't need a body in certain cases, but it's a real, that dog found led to the conviction of Richard Satchwell. There's no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And she indicated very strongly. So hopefully, look, I mean, I said it's a long shot, but if there is a body there, I think Fern, or remains there, I think Fern would indicate it, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I think we should, and I don't think we should go through the entire history of the case because people are probably familiar with it, but it's interesting just maybe to talk about how we got here a little bit, because this is kind of one of those things, and I suppose it's inevitable when there's a case that's gone on for this many years. There are so many theories. There's been books written on this, there's documentaries been made on this, and names like Larry Murphy have been floated as potential killers in this case. It's now looking like that may not be the case. And then probably the one thing that a lot of people do remember, and I think it's worth talking about, is the Johnny Fox's element of this case. So obviously Annie's last movements that we kind of know of, the ones that are often reported, is she went to a St. Patrick's Day parade with friends, and then we know that she went to Cafe Java on Leeson Street on the 25th of March, collected her wages. She worked in that as a waitress in Donnybrook, and then on the 26th of March she was speaking to flatmates who were going home for the weekend, and she went to the AIB in Sandymount, and people may remember that CCTV still of Annie McCarrick going to the AIB at around 11 a.m. on the morning of the 26th of March. And so the difference kind of now is the next step was supposedly she went on a bus to Enniskerry, and then there was talk that she had been sighted in Johnny Fox's pub. But it now seems as though the Johnny Fox's sightings have been called into question to a certain extent.
Yes, and just the CCTV footage. She was in the bank that morning, but I think that they're happy that the CCTV footage was from another day, a few days earlier, maybe 11 days earlier. I read somewhere, but anyway, she was in the bank on that day, and we know she went shopping, and she left her bag of shopping in the kitchen of her house in Sandymount. So it should indicate that she left the house in a hurry. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody would, bring your shopping home, leave it there, and then go out. So maybe she met somebody she knew, somebody called to the house. I think that's probably the most plausible thing. So, so there were 2 points, two major sightings. Enniskerry, she got this bus to Enniskerry, and then people said they saw her in Enniskerry. And then in Johnny Fox's pub, which is in Glencullen in South County Dublin. I think it's one of the most famous pubs in Dublin. It's very well known.
Massive tourist spot, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So at least one worker in that pub, after the public appeal, told Gardai that he believes he saw a woman matching Annie's description, talking with a man. And there are this was before my time. She disappeared in March 93. I started in journalism in 1993, but didn't really get into crime until the year 2000 down here. I was working up north. So I have written about it extensively, but I didn't cover it at the time. But reading all the stuff and looking at all the stories from the time, there were stories that, for example, that she seemed upset and nervous at one stage when she was talking about, I think it was buying a bit of cake and said, "Will I buy this?" And she looked nervous. So there were several stories, and there were several, if memory serves me right, there was somebody saw her who knew her getting on the bus to Enniskerry. But then once it came out about Enniskerry, other people came forward to say they had seen her in Enniskerry. Yeah. So really, I think the focus was Enniskerry, and the focus was definitely Johnny Fox's pub. And I think that's where Larry Murphy comes in, because that sort of part of Leinster, he's in Baltinglass in Wicklow. It's not, we know that he was active in Newbridge in County Kildare. Yeah. And, Carlow and all around there. So it's a million miles away from his stomping ground, shall we say, and, various descriptions. So he was looked at. There was a former IRA man who was looked at. There was a whole rake of suspects. Yeah. We know that there was one man who was known to her, was a person of interest. And I wonder, did the whole focus being on Enniskerry and Johnny Fox's sort of inculcating Gardai a belief that this was a stranger kidnap?
Yeah, I wonder that too. Like, it just seems as though the focus moved away from maybe people who would have been in the inner circle of Annie's life at that point in time, which, that's often what you do in these missing persons cases. The first thing you look at are the people closest to, but it seemed the focus moved away from that, and that this was possibly a stranger. But, there were two brothers, weren't there? That were well known, and it was reported at the time back in the 1990s of their involvement in the case, and I suppose now the focus has come back to them. But I want to mention the fact, if you don't mind, about 2020 there was a private investigator who kind of looked at this, and he ruled out the Enniskerry side of things. And I don't know whether he was instrumental in the Garda investigation being refocused on that. So they began to, in more recent years, look back at that social circle and the people that were there in the beginning.
I think that's fair. And I think one of the major catalysts for this investigation was the 30th anniversary, which was March 2023. And that was when... Now, it probably happened a few weeks or months earlier, but they announced it on the anniversary, that the case had gone from a missing person case to a murder inquiry. Now, we've spoken about this before. Karen Dernan, Elizabeth Clark, Jojo Dullard, Deirdre Jacob. There's a number of missing person cases that have been reclassified as murder. Fiona Pender, for example, just a few weeks ago, right? That gives Gardai more resources, and it gives them more powers, sealing off houses, all that sort of thing. So calling something a murder inquiry, it does raise the stakes somewhat. And I remember I did a story about this. After it became a murder inquiry, even though there was no body, after it became a murder inquiry, the two brothers, it's fair to say, became the focus of the investigation. And it's fair to say, we're slightly bound by what we can say, but it's fair to say they were not strangers. They would have been known to Miss McCarrick. And the suspicion always was that one of those brothers was the killer, and the other person may have had information, we'll put it that way, but you can be suspects.
And we know that the Gardaí went and spoke to one of those brothers who's now residing in another country, and that this brother is actually unwell and in hospital, and was spoken to on a hospital bed about his account. And on the foot of that, and I know you did this story, Mick, so maybe you're better talking about it, but he said some things that were pertinent to this case and were maybe instrumental in having this other brother be arrested.
As a result of speaking to the brother, he made a voluntary statement overseas. That was, from what I'm told, that was one of the major catalysts for the decision to arrest. And I think that all settles around alibi. We spoke about Enniskerry and Johnny Fox as being the catalyst. And I think one of the reasons for that was this man, who's quite a wealthy businessman, shall we say, had alibis for the night. So if you're a Garda and you have several alibis for this person, and it's a missing person case, you probably are going to say, okay, well, if that person is alibied, we need to look elsewhere. He was a person of interest. We know he was interviewed at least twice during the whole investigation. But look, around the time of the case becoming a murder inquiry, he became the suspect. And ever since, that's just over 2 years, guards have been working on this. And I think what the brother said helped crystallize things. Maybe I don't think he ratted the brother, right? But he may have said things that didn't chime or chipped away at the alibi. And there may be somebody else as well. The murder inquiries are very, very tight, and it's hard to get. Let's be honest, Paul. It is hard to get. We're a land in scraps, but I would believe that as a result of that conversation with the brother, the decision and other aspects, the decision was made to arrest this man, and that happened last Thursday.
Yeah, and since then, you and I have learned a surprising amount on this, haven't we? About even what was reported back in the 1990s. There was some really, now that the investigation is refocused on these brothers, there's some interesting facts even that were reported at the time or that were known about at the time that are, I suppose, being looked at now with a bigger lens. Like, I did an interview with Kenneth Strange, so he's a former FBI agent, and he would be a friend of the McCarrick family, and he looked at this case and he came over here and everything, and he told me about when John McCarrick, the father of Annie McCarrick, came over here with I think a brother, so an uncle of Annie McCarrick. They were involved in the initial search for Annie, and there were a couple of people around at the time who were helping with the search, and there was one man who was a bit obsessive and was constantly asking questions about the search and how it was going, to the point where he was annoying the father of Annie McCarrick, and the father of Annie McCarrick actually had to tell him to back off because he was just too interested. And that same person supposedly said to the uncle, my brother, he can be quite violent. And that was known about 32 years ago. Now, that's not enough, but it is, looking at it now, perhaps pertinent, But
yes, but we also know that the suspect was known for his violence. The guards were told that he had a propensity for violence. And we also know that he had a bit of an obsession with Annie. Now, what we have subsequently learned was that this man was in a relationship with a woman, but he had effectively an affair with Annie. And that, you mentioned Annie going to the Patrick's Day parade, obviously the March 17th. We know that she was with this suspect on the 18th of March, so the next day. She was in a pub in South Dublin, and then she went in a car to a location in the Lucan area, and they had an affair that night. Right. But speaking to sources, that man, even though he was in a relationship, wanted the affair to continue. Annie did not want the affair to continue. And she was racked with guilt. And she would have known the man's girlfriend. Yeah. And her plan, she decided to end this liaison or fling or affair, whatever you want to call it. And my understanding was that she also decided to tell the suspect's girlfriend what had happened. So, look, she was racked with guilt, and she didn't get a chance to end the affair, we don't think, and she definitely didn't get a chance to tell the suspect's girlfriend what had happened because Annie disappeared. But that was, so that the fling happened on the 18th. One aspect of it was on the 18th of March. Annie was last seen on the 26th of March. So just about a week beforehand, and obviously we don't know what happened in the times between, but she did. I was speaking to someone today who knew Annie very well, and she confirmed that about the affair, and that Annie was racked with guilt and wanted to end it.
Wow. I mean, that right there could be everything, couldn't it? It could be the very reason why she was killed, but we don't know that for certain. But it's certainly it's coming together in a way that it hasn't before.
Yes, and I think, and it's not my job to defend the guards, and it's certainly not my job to defend journalists, right? But looking back at the time, I think the biggest issue for the guards was the alibi. If that man had a rock solid alibi, they're, they're, I'm not saying they're wasting their time, but does it make sense to say, right, well, we're going to do everything around to demolish this alibi, or, right, look, there is a sighting in Enniskerry. There's a couple of our getting on a bus. There is a couple of sightings over in Enniskerry itself, and one or two people say they saw her in Johnny Fox's. So hindsight's wonderful, and we always say that hindsight, is 2020. But it strikes me that for various reasons, the focus was South Dublin, and that, I think, made it, in the minds of guards, a stranger kidnap. Mm-hmm. And then that's where you go. That's where you go into people like Larry Murphy.
Yeah, when in fact it may be now that she was killed by someone known to her.
The suspect was known to her. Look,
yeah.
And this is what we were going to talk about the stakeout. I did on Monday, Mick O'Neill and I, and you on Thursday, both made efforts to speak to this man, because we want to speak to this man. And it involved going to a location outside Dublin and sitting there for quite some time. No, we were unsuccessful. But that's
today. I was there today. But that's the job. No, but I suppose similar.
Sorry, I was going to say, you and I were at locations. I think it's fair to say, having seen the locations, that this person has significant assets.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously we discovered properties connected to him as a result of a business that he is attached to, and there are freely available documents that you can see that. But it's another thing to go and see these properties, and there is a rather large property. I won't say where, that we attempted to contact this man from, but we know that it is connected to him. And well, let's just say it's not your average 3-bedroom semi-detached house.
I called the suspect a wealthy businessman and then a millionaire, and by that I meant he has assets worth at least $1 million. And having seen the properties, I think that is probably accurate.
Oh, it's completely fair to say. I mean, there's a gated property that I attempted to door knock today. That there's a long drive and significant distance between the house and the gates, and I couldn't knock it, unfortunately. And we did stake out another property. But
I was going to ask you, Paul. Sorry, it was a rural area, okay? And I always say this: rural areas are extremely hard to surveil.
Oh, incredibly. Look, and it may be, you never know, because people might assume, this man doesn't want to talk, and why would he? He may well want to talk. He may well want to clear the record and say, I'm innocent and I'm wrongly arrested, we're only trying to contact him, but people that can sometimes be difficult to find and difficult to contact. And in this case, this man seems to possibly have at least 2 properties that are connected to him. So we don't know where he is, but we want to hear what he has to say if he wants to speak. That is,
it's exactly the same as this suspect as with Michael Kelly. You went down to Kerry, you gave Mr. Kelly an opportunity to talk, and he did. So if the person doesn't want to talk, that's fine, but just say he does, and that's what we have to do. We have to, I don't think, God, it'd be great. I don't think he's going to email the Mirror or the Star and go, I want to speak to Mick and Paul. So we have to go and knock on doors and say, hello, sir, would you like to talk?
Yeah, and look, you never know. I mean, this is a huge case, an infamous case, and this man may want to clear his name. Obviously, he denies, I'd say, any involvement, because if he accepted his involvement, he would be charged by now. So he was released without charge. And the search of a property that was connected to him over 32 years ago is still ongoing. I just want to mention Nancy McCarrick, the mother of Annie McCarrick. She's 80. I want to get this wrong. She's 81 years of age now. She's living in Long Island in New York, and I managed to track down a phone number for her on Monday, and I called her, and I just wanted to ask her what she made of this search, because obviously she's tirelessly been campaigning for answers. Really, she just wants her daughter back, and tragically, she was actually due to come. Nancy McCarrick was due to come here to Ireland only a couple of days after her daughter went missing. So they were due to be reunited right before she vanished. That's a very sad element to this. But I spoke to Nancy on the phone, and she's obviously very upset and she's nervous. Like, I suppose she picked up the phone wondering, okay, is this something, because unfortunately it was just me, and I wasn't the only journalist, I'm sure, trying to contact her, but she was grateful for the fact that this has stayed in the media, and she wanted to, I suppose, highlight the fact that this is a hopeful development for her, and that she's hoping that God, as she put it, only God knows what happened, and that God provides the answers, is what she said to me. But I asked her about justice, because I said, someone's been arrested in this case, and did that come as a surprise to you? And she said that was a surprise and a shock, that someone had been arrested after all this time. She wasn't expecting that. But she said, look, this sounds terrible. I'm sorry, it sounds terrible to say, but I don't have any interest in justice. Really, my only concern is Annie. So she was at pains to stress to me that this isn't about bringing somebody to court for her. She just wants, I suppose, a body at this point, answers as to just where her daughter ended up and what happened. That's all she wants to know.
So you mentioned the number of women who disappeared around Leinster in the early to late 1990s. I think Deirdre Jacob was the last one to disappear, and that was July 1998.
Yeah.
And they were all part of Operation Trace, because the belief was, there were 6 or 7, the fear or the suspicion was that all these disappeared women may have been the victims of a serial killer. Now, I remember somebody saying this to me. I think they ruled out a serial killer, because they identified suspects in most of them, and they were all separate. And somebody said, is it worse that there's one serial killer, or there are 6 killers out there who haven't been caught? But none of them have been found, and there have been repeated searches. We know that there was a search recently for Fiona Pender. We know there was a search for Deirdre Jacob. Wouldn't it be great if they were all found? Wouldn't it be great if there's one found? Even that would be just fantastic.
Yeah.
I just keep on thinking of Nancy McCarrick and John, the father, Annie's father, who was a former police officer. He wasn't in the NYPD. I think he was in the Parks Police in New York. But he died without finding out what happened to his daughter. And I presume Nancy, as you say, she just wants to know.
Yeah.
It must be horrendous.
It must be. I can't imagine it. And, she didn't say too much to me, because she's really just, at this point, she's just waiting for answers. She doesn't want to even compromise what's happened so far. But, she seems hopeful. And she told me that the Gardai are contacting her every single day. So they're keeping her updated throughout all of this. I wonder, I do wonder, I think it seems to be, I don't want to say there's confidence, but there is a hope here that maybe this case, this long unsolved, infamous case, actually might be solved. And it's funny, isn't it, that as the pieces kind of come together, that it actually seems to be, I hate to say the word simple, but it seems to be quite simple in the end. There were so many wild and wacky theories. Even I think there was a Spanish sexual abuser who was suspected at one point. Larry Murphy, as I said, lots of different theories, but it seems as though it was someone, it may well have been someone known to her, and it was just missed. And with a fresh pair of eyes, they now seem to be closer than ever to solving this.
And if you look back, hindsight, as I say, is perfect. But say in 1993, you and I both know that mobile phone data, cell site analysis, plays a massive role in any Garda investigation. Were there any mobile phones in Dublin then? I can guarantee you Annie McCarrick didn't have one. Very little CCTV. Look at all the big investigations. Look at, is he charged? I can't say, but there was a big high profile one that was based almost entirely in CCTV, one of the feud murders. That they got those fellas, and it was purely largely because of the CCTV. They were able to track people, right? Yeah. Neither of those two significant tools existed for the Garda Síochána back in the day.
Yeah, yeah, and that leaves eyewitness testimony and just and then going back and tracing her last known movements, who she was around, who she was in contact with, and it seems as though that all that Enniskerry element has been axed from the story, and they've gone right back to Sandymount. And where did she go after she went to the bank? What was her final movements around there, and who did she interact with? They've gone right back to that.
I wonder, the fact that she, as I mentioned this earlier, the fact that her shopping was unpacked, would the indications not be that someone went to the house? where Annie lived to talk to her, and
she was interrupted.
Was she interrupted? Was she killed there? Was she abducted? So guards or sources said to me when this was reclassified as a murder, the answer lies in South Central Dublin. In other words, where Annie was.
It's so frustrating, isn't it, that it actually in the end seems to be, you know, it just back to where she was living the whole time, that is the answer. But that's what they do. They go back and they look at these cases from the start, and that's why they are closer to solving this, you know. Yeah. Hopefully.
And arrest is a big thing. So look, it's not the end. This is probably, to use that terrible cliche, the start of the end. You know what I mean? Yeah. Please God. So, you know, they're closer to solving it than ever before, I would say, because they're focusing in on her social circle and all the information they have already.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. We'll keep an eye on it. So I think we'll leave it there, will we?
Yeah. All right. Great stuff.
Thanks, Mick. As people may or may not know, Mick is about to take a bit of annual leave, so he's going to go and enjoy himself and take a well-earned break. So I'll try to talk to you next week, but if not, that's why.
Yes, because people have to, you know, it's not a hobby, but we have our day jobs to do, and you could be up to your yin-yangs next week when I'm away. So hopefully.
No doubt. Right. Thank you very much.
All right. Cheers.